Yo guys, welcome back to a brand new Babble Mouth episode of the Creepypasta series. It is volume 3, episode 35. Actually, it's not. No, it's not. It'll be episode 42. Anyway, I'm sure he'll edit it out. But yeah, welcome back to volume 3, and we're gonna see how this one does if anybody's interested in listening to it. As far as my week is gone, nothing really interesting. I'm probably just gonna get into the stories. I mean, same old stuff. You don't want to listen. You don't want to hear. You don't want to listen to. Probably just gonna get into the stories. First time reading creepypasta stories on my own. Nexus actually provided these for me, so I've been lacking on it. So we're getting it done now. I already scrolled through the bottom of it just to see. But it is anonymous, so there's nobody there to credit. But it looks like this came out in 2010, September 1st. And this one is called Squidward's Suicide, Creepypasta Story. Estimated time is about 7 minutes. I read pretty slow, so probably be longer than that. Strap yourselves in. Preferably listen with earbuds, because it's about to get creepy. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie that the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it is final yet animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of a rockabye bivalve, and SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny would work related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is where things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as the skip never happened. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him, not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show. But you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in center frame, and he is too booing. Very much unlike him. That is the oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to the children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is, at this point, there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He sat there, blinking, in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, sound in the background, very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets louder and more severe, as if a storm was brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as sound the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second. We had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor, paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his unturned face. Popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, but looking as if you had touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were off a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew what he had to do. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, barrettes in the pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out, and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above, another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. And most fear-inducing of all, is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and back it up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and the sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was so confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and the deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. And the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point. There was just a handful of us to watch again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp was of a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened to this, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before. Now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. That was Squidward's suicide. Actually pretty fucking creepy. I enjoyed that one. The rating for this on this website, it's 8.97 out of 10. I'd say that's pretty accurate for me. Maybe like a 8 out of 10. This was pretty creepy. Especially the way I was reading it, because I'm the best. I think you'll get really immersed into it. The next one we're moving on to is this one's called a Rake. It was April 27, 2009, and people have voted that this is a 8.95 out of 10. Excuse me. As the sun begins to set and the trees huddle together in small dark groups, as if shielding themselves against the coming of night, you step quietly and quickly through the carpet of fallen leaves and straight twigs, recognizing and noting as you do every rustle, every snap of a branch created by your own footfalls. You note them so that you can distinguish them from the other sounds. The soft rustling of the leaves, the crack of bracken somewhere behind you, You increase your speed knowing that night is not the only thing drawing closer. The sound increases as your pace and heartbeat quickens. You turn and, in the fading light, catch a single glimpse of the hunched, crawling thing that is pursuing you, creeping forward like an animal and yet looking so horribly human. You only caught a single glimpse, but then you start to run. One glimpse is enough. Mostly associated with the image of a bald, male-skinned creature hunched at an angle with bright, orb-like eyes staring into the camera. The Rake has become a staple creepypasta monster adopted by many authors as shorthand for a creature resembling the one depicted in the photo and placed in various settings. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain that I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him, for once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice, and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever awake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the Great Terror. I have experienced the Great Terror. I have experienced the Great Terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. Unintelligible text, it says. A Mariner's Log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake. From a witness in 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten out to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him up in the process. I apologized and told him that I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed, so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed, and then he grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused a strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in the flailing sort of motion, right along the bed until it was less than a foot away from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while. Just looking at my husband, the creature then placed its hand on his knees and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "It's the Rake." My husband drove his car into the lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. He did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, but the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature now referred to as the Rake. It took 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave us any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages, and never mentioned it again. The ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of the series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the second week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took me almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anybody listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and now I believe that it spoke when I was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to him staring at me. The Rake is the name given to a strange pale-skinned creature that stalks its victims on all 4s and has the appearance that someone resembles a mutated dog. The fanged and taloned creature is commonly said to live in the woods or forested areas. However, the spread of the character and the resulting lack of common rules around its habitat or behaviors means that it now has a far wider presence, moving away from the woods and forests to be found in more urban areas, and even repeating the common creepypasta trope of appearing at the end of people's beds or in their rooms at night. The common consensus of the creature's appearance shows it has large, bulbous eyes that are reflective when caught in the light of a camera, a drooping jaw with a large, fang-filled mouth, and often either a nose that is missing entirely, or which is simply an open socket, similar to that of a skull. The creature is usually shown naked and crawling toward the viewer on all 4s, suggesting that, though it is a bipedal, it prefers to stalk victims in a manner similar to a 4-legged animal. The matter of the Rake's appearance is an interesting one that is linked directly to the myth's origins and development. into an image that even the mainstream media duped. In an origin story similar to that of Slenderman, the mythic creature known as the Rake originally evolved out of a 2005 thread on 4chan where an anonymous poster board suggested that contributors try to collaboratively come up with ideas for a new monster. After some initial back and forth discussion, one particular idea was chosen as the most promising candidate and began to be formed, added to, and manipulated by several users. The descriptions of this creature went through numerous iterations before finally settling, shared some characteristics with the commonly accepted Rake image that is widespread today. However, there were also some glaring differences. For example, the original suggestions called for 3 eyes, whilst the most common vision of the Rake has only 2, and for the creature to lack other facial features, having for an example a missing nose or mouth. The first story to feature the Rake appeared on Brain Somerville's personal blog on July 20th, 2006. Somerville, who was a regular user of Something Awful site, provided a backstory for the Rake, and with this story cemented some of the more commonly accepted features of the creature's appearance. The story indicates that the sightings of the Rake-like creatures date back as far as the 12th century, that the first records of the creature are from the 17th century, and the creature can be linked to unexplained phenomena and sightings of cryptid-like beings in the northeastern United States. A late 2008 Rake stories appeared on LiveJournal. The story and variants featuring the Rake appeared on Something Awful 4chan by the following year and first appeared on the paranormal subreddit in 2010. It later found its way into Creepypasta forums and began to increase in popularity. A common misconception is that the appearance of the Rake is based off a widely shared image of the creature with glowing eyes staring into the camera, of a deer hunter that is sometimes referred to as the Berwick Monster. This image, which is now most closely associated with the Rake mythology and the common starting point from which the Rake fan art and variants are derived, was actually taken seriously by mainstream media outlets when it first appeared. A still image allegedly to have been extracted from the memory card of a now broken night vision camera was posted to the Wild Game Innovations site by someone claiming to have actually encountered the creature. The image of the story and the strange encounter was then picked up by media outlets as widespread as Britain's The Daily Mail and NBC, which featured the image and a brief report on the alleged sighting on its morning show. However, rather than this image influencing the initial ideas of the Rake's appearance, the timeline seems to indicate that the Rake stories were retrospectively linked to this image. Since discussions about the creature's appearance, Somerville's original story, and the first postings of major creepypasta and paranormal sites predate the image creation and appearance in news media, the association of the image with the character can most likely be attributed to the face of the image itself appeared in the same month as a single topic blog Tumblr account, hoping to gather together all the fan art, copypasta, and sighting reports into one place, with fans of the Rake story or those encountering it for the first time inflating the image with the story and association that would continue to the present. Incidentally, despite some sites claiming that the Berwick Monster photograph has never been authenticated or debunked, whilst the Rake clearly developed from a collaborative effort online. Upon examining the creature's most generally accepted image, there are a number of precursory influences to consider. The creature's pale skin, lack of a nose and gaping mouth are reminiscent of a Fluke Man monster central to the Season 2 X-Files episode, The Host, in which a white-skinned creature with yellowish eyes, a gaping mouth, and bald head is featured. Visions of the creature that are heavily influenced by the Berwick Monster image are also commonly linked to the 2006 Fallen Angel of Catalonia footage, which, though also revealed to be a hoax, bears some striking resemblances to the later Berwick Monster photograph, leading to some to believe it may have been a direct influence upon the developers of Resistance 3 Grim image. Later fan art depictions of the Rake have altered the character's appearance somewhat, exaggerating certain features and placing greater emphasis on the creature's fangs, bald head, and elongated fingers into an image strikingly similar to the character Lizzie, created by special effects artist Tom Savini from the Tales of the Dark Side episode In the Closet. And that is the end of that. It's up to Nexus if he wants to cut that at the end of that original story by Brian Somerville. The rest is just like lore. But it also has to do with like the origin lore of the monster. I didn't even know this was what it was called. I've seen this video of this. It's on YouTube. I've seen it. It's the naked fucking thing with the glowing eyes. If anything looks like that and gets close to you, you're probably fucking dead. That's just me. I enjoyed that story though. Our final story of the night, or I guess the podcast for this episode, is 8 out of 8. All these got good ratings. 8.78 out of 10. Credit Shiloh Rose, aka Lamishi Mish. This was in February 29th, 2012. This one is called Sally. Stay with me. This is about 9 minutes long. Again, I read it very slow, and I'm trying to get into this for you guys. Be immersed with you. The summer was nice and warm that year. The sun, as always, brought warmth to your skin. The light breezes that swept through the neighborhood made the days not too hot or cold. It was simply perfect weather, but one summer Sally would never forget. Sally was a young girl, 8 years old, long curly brown hair, and bright green eyes. She was always polite. She never lied, and did as she was told. Her mother and father simply adored her. They couldn't ask for a better daughter. Sally giggled as she played with her friends outside of their home. Various games like hopscotch and jump rope, even dolls and tag. Sally's mother smiled warmly at the innocent sight and wiped her hands on her apron, calling out, "Sally, come inside now, it's time for lunch." Sally looked up from her doll and smiled. "Okay, Mommy." Sitting down at the dinner table, Sally lightly bounced in her seat, excited for who knows what. Her mother placed down a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the crust cut off. A waste of bread, by the way. Some carrot and celery sticks on the side, and juice to drink. "Thank you, Mama." "You're welcome, sweetie." As the child began to take hold of her sandwich, her mother took a seat across the grill and smiled, watching her eat. "Guess what? Your Uncle Johnny is coming over." Sally looked up and smiled. The corners of her lips had traces of peanut butter on them. "Mon Johnny?" she repeated through her food. Her mother laughed and nodded. He's coming to help Daddy with his job. And to look after you too. Maybe all of us can go to the carnival too." Sally chewed the rest of her bite quickly and swallowed. "And Sarah come and Jenny come too?" Her mother looked up and thought. "Well, that's up to their mom and dads to say, but if they can, sure." Again, the child giggled and bounced in her seat. Again, now even more excited of this year's summer vacation. Over the course of the next few days, Uncle Johnny drove up to the house, climbing out of his car. The man stretched his arms over his head and let out a tired sigh. "Uncle Johnny!" A small voice chirped, earning the attention of the man. Sally dropped the jump rope she was playing with and ran over to the family member, hugging him. "Hey, Sal, how you been?" he asked, lifting the girl up with ease, giving her a proper hug. The girl giggled and looked back to her friends, who were now waving in their direction. "I've been playing with Sarah and Jenny. Let's go inside and tell Mama you're here." "Sounds like a great idea." He smiled and walked inside the house, calling out to the woman. "Marie, I'm here," he called, followed by Sally mimicking him. "Mama, he's here." The housewife hurried over out of the kitchen and smiled to see Johnny made it. "Johnny, you got here safe and sound." The man placed the girl down on the ground and gave her bottom a pat to send her off, and hugged the woman. "Of course I did. Why else would I come here safe and sound?" he laughed. Walking into the kitchen with the woman, Sally trotted over to the front door, calling out she was going back outside to play. "Make sure you come in before dark." "Yes, ma'am." And off the girl went. As dinner drew near, Sally's father came home, happy to see his brother was there as well. Walking in with his daughter, he strolled up to Johnny with a handshake and a hug. "Nice to see you, man. How you been?" he asked, crossing his arms, watching his wife set up the table for supper. Johnny gave a shrug of his shoulders, fiddling with his thumbs. "Aaron and I split up." "Ah, that's terrible. I'm sorry." Johnny shook his hand with a smile. It's alright. I'm happy. I can move freely without having someone constantly wanting to know where I am and what I'm doing." The two men laughed together, making their way to the table to eat. Thank you. Glad you liked it." It's yummy, Mama." The adult smiled and chuckled from the child's praise. Plate after plate was empty, and Sally began to yawn over and over again, rubbing her eyes with her hands. Her mother smiled and gently rubbed her back. "Looks like someone's tired. Time for bed." Sally nodded and hopped off her seat, picking up her plate and carrying it to the sink. Her mother rose up to take her to bed, but stopped from John grabbing a hold of her arm. "I'll take her to bed," he smiled, earning one in return. "Alright, thank you, John." The man nodded, watching the woman make her way to clean the dishes and put up any leftovers. Then he looked to see his brother leave to the bathroom to wash up and followed after the young girl to her room. John smiled and closed the door behind him, watching the girl rummage around through her dresser for pajamas to wear. "You need any help?" he asked, watching the girl look up and nod. "Okay, let's see what you got." The man waltzed up alongside her and began looking through her various pajamas. "You got some strawberry printed ones. I bet you'll smell just like them in your dreams." He took the shirt up and showed her, giving it a few deep inhales. Sally giggled and shook her head, indicating she didn't want to wear her strawberry pajamas. Johnny nodded and placed the shirt back. Then he pulled out another shirt with a unicorn on it. "How about this one? I bet you'll ride on the Miss Unicorn here." Again, the child giggled and shook her head no. The man let out a small huff before placing it back, then took out a regular nightgown. "How about this? Be able to turn into a princess with this." Sally's eyes lit up and clapped her hands excitedly and nodded. Placing the gown on her bed, he reached over to her and began to unbutton her shirt. "I can get dressed, Uncle," she said with a smile, looking down at his hands on her shirt. The man smiled back and nodded, continuing to work his way down her shirt. "I bet you can, but you're tired. Why not have some help?" he asked, watching Sally nod a few times. Once getting her shirt unbuttoned, he slipped it off of her shoulders and gave her tummy a nice poke, making her giggle. He grinned and took a hold of her rim of her shorts and pulled them down. Finally, the man grabbed a hold of her nightgown and pushed the opening over her head, making sure her arms can go through the sleeves. "All done," he said happily, watching the girl smile back, giggling when she bounded the top of her bed. Johnny rose up and picked up her clothes. The door opened and walked in Sally's mother, coming to tuck her in. "You ready for bed?" she asked, walking around the bed. Johnny looked up and hurried over to the other side of the bed. "I'll tuck her in, that okay?" Marie looked up at him and smiled, shaking her head. "Of course not." She looked down at her daughter and leaned in, kissing the child on her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Mama." Giving the girl a gentle rub on her thumb. With her thumb on her forehead, the woman took the clothes Johnny had made her out of the way out of the room. Johnny smiled to the mother and walked over to the light switch, flicking it off. He carefully closed the door to her room and locked it. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder towards Sally. Johnny wore a chilling, crooked smile. After the next few days, Marie noticed that Sally wasn't acting herself. She wasn't smiling as brightly as she did. She wasn't chipper and didn't speak with the same amount of happiness. Marie took a hold of the child's hand before she left to play with her friends and took her aside. Sally looked up at her mother with a confused look. "Honey, are you feeling okay?" she asked, kneeling down at the child's height. They spelled height wrong, by the way. Sally stared at her idly and slowly began to weep. Her mother widened in her eyes confusion. Sally? Mama? I didn't want to. The girl managed to say through hiccuping sobs. Didn't want to do what, sweetie? I didn't want to play. I didn't want to play this game. The child looked up at her mother and hugged her tight. He touched me and he made me touch him. Marie frowned and gently began stroking her child's hair, comforting her, lightly shushing her to calm her down. Shh. It's okay. Mama's here now. It was a nightmare, that's all. The girl had a scary nightmare. Everything is fine now, okay? Don't worry about it anymore. She watched Sally look up at her, her breathing chopped up from her crying, and smiled. Oh, okay, Mama. Her mother smiled and kissed her forehead. Now go wash up. Don't want to play with your friends with a dirty face now. Sally let out a small giggle and ran out to the bathroom to wash her face. Later that day, Johnny and his brother came back home from work. Frank sighed, smiling when he saw Sally wave to him. The father waved back and closed the car door, making his way up to the house. Johnny looked up at Sally as well as smiled, waving to her. The child's smile slowly whittled, showing less happiness in it, but waved back as well. Johnny also walked inside the house, pausing when he heard the conversation between his brother and his wife. Sally, what? Frank asked. She had a nightmare, a very bad one. She said he touched her. Well, who the hell is he? I don't know, Frank. But it was only a nightmare. I just wanted to inform you of what's been going on with her and why she's acting differently. Johnny furrowed his brows in anger, his knuckles turning white, then calmed down quickly, thinking fast. He put a smile on and walked into the room, making it look like he just walked into the conversation, and rose his brows. Whoops, did I interrupt something? He asked, watching the couple shake their heads. Johnny smiled again and thumbed back in the direction of the car. I'm gonna head to the store. You need anything, Marie? The woman smiled and looked towards the kitchen. Yes, actually, can you get some eggs, milk, bread, and some juice? Johnny nodded, and about to leave until he paused. Sally wanted to come along too. Just wanted to inform you. Thank you, John. He nodded again and made his way out of the house, keys in hand, looking out to Sally with her friends. He cupped his hand over his mouth. Sally! The child looked up at him and stared. Come on, let's go to the store. Johnny made his way over to the car, gesturing for the girl to follow him. Sally sat there for a moment and then placed her dolls on the grass. I'll be back. Please watch over Marzipan and Lily for me. Jenny and Sarah smiled and nodded, continuing to play their game of dolls without her. Sally reluctantly made her way around the car, climbing into the passenger seat, and buckled herself in. Did Mama want you to go to the store? She asked. Johnny nodded and put the keys in ignition, turning it on, and backed out of the driveway. Yep. She wants me to get some food for her. Maybe I can get you something too. He grinned, looking down at the child. Sally nervously smiled back and looked ahead, watching the scenery pass by. As soon as they got to the road leading to the store, Sally noticed he wasn't slowing down and turned into the parking lot. She furrowed her brows, confused, and looked up at him. Uncle Johnny, the store's back that way, she said, pointing in the direction of the Whole Foods store, but nothing came from the man. He just continued driving, a faint smile on his face. The child sat up and looked past the back seat, watching the store slowly grow smaller till it was out of sight. Realizing that they weren't going grocery shopping, the child watched her uncle drive into a small parking lot in the community park near town. No one went to the park on Sundays. Sally felt nervous. Her breathing quickened, watching the man with wide eyes. Johnny put the car into park and turned the ignition off, looking to the child. Anger obviously showing in his features. Told your mom what happened, didn't you? He asked. watching the girl frantically shake her head. You're not playing that game right, Sally. His tone almost had a slightly singing to it. The man reached over and pulled the girl to him, ignoring the struggling she was putting up with her whimpering pleas. You said you played the game with me, Sally, and you lied to me. Opening the door beside him, the man climbed out alongside with the child and shoved her to the ground, quickly pinning her down, ignoring the cries and withering the child was making. You have to be punished for breaking the rules, he said in a slight songy tone, and began to unbuckle his belt. This just in. Couple finds the body of an 8-year-old Sally Williams in the community park. The week-long search is now closed. More tonight at 9. She could have sworn she closed her door before climbing into bed. Guess I forgot. Getting up from the warmth and comfort of her bed, the teen made her way across the room and shut the door. Before she can climb back into her covers, a creak outside the hall rose up. Was her parents up? They must have checked on her to see if she was asleep or something. As soon as she got her legs covered up, the teen froze to hear a faint sound of crying. Though it sounded like a child, slowly rising up from the bed once more, the girl made her way to the door and opened it. The crying seemed to be louder outside of her room. Peering down the darkness, the teen crept down the hallway, following the sounds of whimpering. Once getting to the end of the hall, they spelled hall wrong, the girl gasped. Sitting on the floor in front of the moonlit window was a little girl. She was hunched over crying. How did she get into their house? Through the window? Swallowing hard, the teen spoke up. Who are you? How did you get into my house? She asked. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The child slowly moved, her trembling hands away from her face, and looked behind her, twitching lightly. Blood replaced with her tears. Staining her hands, there was a deep clot of blood, and hair on the side of her head. Blood leaking from the wound down her face onto the dirty nightgown. Her bright green eyes seemed like they saw right through her soul. This is my house, the child spoke, her voice raspy sounding as if she was struggling to speak. The girl's body twitched and wiggled, oddly as if she rose up to her feet and turned her face to the teen. Her feet were dirty, as if she'd been running through the mud. Scrapes covered her knees and legs. The end of her gown was torn and tattered. The name Sally was sewn into the front. Reaching out with her blood-soaked hands, the girl slowly smiled, blood staining her teeth as she spoke. And that was Sally Play With Me. That was a fucked up story. I honestly wanted to stop like halfway through because this is disturbing as fuck. I mean, this might be a little triggering for some people, but I mean, it is just a story. But still, it's fucking wrong. Wrong. And just reading the comments here, it's pretty much how I felt reading that one. Yeah, that one was pretty fucked up. Who knows if these, I mean, are these stories even real? Like, some of these stories might be fucking real. And people are putting these into, like, as fan fiction or whatever, or just fiction. This was actually fun to do. It's fun to read. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. It ended up being an hour episode. Pretty impressed. I'm pretty impressed. I didn't fuck up too much. Yeah, be sure to give it 5 stars. If you really liked the episode, maybe leave a comment down below or on the tweet when Nexus throws it out there. Appreciate you guys leaving the 5 stars on Spotify or Apple. Not Pandora, by the way. Because Pandora. Sorry, Jay. Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode of Creepypasta. And we'll be back next week with a new episode. I'm guessing. I don't know what it is yet. But if you haven't listened to Are We Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, episode 41, sorry. That's out now. And then by the time you hear this episode will be out. So yeah, be sure to give us a follow on all our social medias and Twitches and YouTubes. And follow the podcast. This is the most consistent we've ever been, and I'm pretty proud of that. We've been doing pretty good with it. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. This episode I did of Creepypasta Volume 3. We'll see you next time.